They restrained me against my will, sexually assaulted me, and recorded everything while mocking me and saying I deserved it because of my work.
You know, looking back, those years before everything went sideways feel almost like they belonged to somebody else. I was 20, 21, living in Buenos Aires, trying so hard to make it all work. I had this tiny apartment in San Telmo that I shared with this girl from my law classes. The place was basically a shoebox, paint peeling off the walls, but I loved the neighborhood, the old cobblestone streets, the tango music spilling out of bars at night, the smell of fresh empanadas in the morning. It felt like real life, you know? During the day, I was at the university, sitting in lectures about constitutional law, taking notes like my future depended on it because I really believed it did. I wanted to be a lawyer so bad. Not some big corporate one, but somebody who could actually help people. I'd walk to class with my backpack slung over one shoulder, stopping at the same little cafe for a cortado and a media luna if I had a few extra pesos. I'd people watch and imagine their stories, thinking one day I'd be the one fighting for them in court. Evenings were when it got tough. I worked nights at this busy cafe near Plaza Dorrego, waiting tables, smiling through the exhaustion. My feet would be killing me by midnight, but the tips helped. I'd come home smelling like coffee and grilled meat, count out whatever I made that night, and stretch it to cover rent, textbooks, and whatever I could send back home. My mom would call sometimes, her voice tired, but trying to sound upbeat. "How are your studies, mija?" she'd ask. I'd tell her they were great, even when I was falling asleep over my notes at 3 a.m. Home back in the South was this whole other world I tried not to think about too much. My dad was the town doctor, the guy everybody respected. Mom taught piano lessons in our living room. The house always had music floating through it, Chopin, Bach, stuff like that. I grew up playing too. I was good at it. Competitions, recitals, the whole thing. People said I was going places, and I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But there were cracks even then, little things I pushed down. My dad drank, but only at night, in his office with the door closed. I'd hear the clink of the bottle sometimes. Mom would just sit there at the piano after her last student left, staring at the keys like she was somewhere else. I walked in on something once when I was 13 that I still don't like to talk about. My dad with a patient? A girl? I closed the door fast and pretended I didn't see. He made me promise to keep quiet for the family. So I did. What else was I supposed to do? My older sister got out when I was 15. She went to Europe, said she'd send for me once she got settled. I waited for those calls that came less and less. Eventually they stopped. I told myself it was okay, that I'd make my own way. I left home at 18 with 2 suitcases and this stubborn belief that if I just worked hard enough, I could build something better. I wasn't going to end up silent and stuck like my mom. That was my biggest fear. In Buenos Aires, I had this little routine that kept me going. Early mornings, I'd run along the river if I wasn't too wiped out, just to clear my head. I'd make these cheap dinners, pasta with whatever was on sale, and study at the kitchen table while my roommate blasted music. On weekends, sometimes I'd treat myself to a book from the used bookstore or sit in a park with my notebook, writing down case studies or just random thoughts. I had friends from uni, girls who were also grinding it out. We'd share notes, complain about professors, dream about the futures we were going to have. I was dating this guy for a little while, nothing serious. He was sweet, studying engineering. We'd go for walks and talk about traveling one day, but I kept most of my real stuff to myself. The money worries, the calls from home, where my mom's voice got quieter every time. I didn't want to burden anybody. I thought I could handle it. I was 21, convinced I was in control of my life. Then my dad had the stroke. Everything changed so fast after that. The hospital bills, the debts that started coming out, stuff I didn't even know about. My mom called me crying, saying the house might go, that she didn't know what to do. I remember sitting on my bed after that call, staring at the wall, feeling this weight settle on my chest. I still thought I could fix it. I still believed if I just pushed harder, kept my head down, I could keep the life I was building. I had no idea how quickly it could all slip away. After my dad's stroke, things didn't fall apart all at once. It was more like little pieces started cracking one by one, and I kept thinking I could patch them up if I just worked harder. At first, it was just more phone calls from my mom. Her voice sounded smaller every time. The hospital bills were piling up, and there were these other debts she kept mentioning, stuff from private treatments and things she wouldn't really explain. I'd send whatever extra I could scrape together from the cafe, skipping meals sometimes so I could transfer a little more. My own rent was already tight. I started picking up extra shifts, working doubles when I could, even though my classes were getting heavier. I remember one night I came home from the cafe at like 2 in the morning, feet throbbing, and my roommate was already asleep. I sat at the kitchen table with my law books open, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept blurring. I'd fall asleep for an hour or two and wake up to my alarm, then drag myself to morning lectures. My grades started slipping a little. Not enough for anyone to notice yet, but I noticed. I used to be the girl who had everything together. Now I was the one borrowing notes from classmates and pretending I was fine. The money situation got worse slowly. First, it was one unexpected bill from the university for some administrative fee I'd forgotten about. Then my roommate said she needed to raise my share of the rent because her own family was struggling. I said, okay, even though I didn't know how I'd swing it. I cut out everything extra. No more cafe stops, no more books, no more runs by the river. I started eating rice and beans most nights. My clothes started looking worn out because I couldn't afford to replace anything. Then the calls from home got more desperate. My mom would cry on the phone telling me creditors were showing up at the house, that they might lose it. She kept saying, Vale, I don't know what we're going to do. I'd tell her I was handling it, that I'd figure something out. But inside, I was panicking. My sister hadn't answered my messages in months. The few scholarships I had were barely covering tuition anymore, and applying for new ones took time I didn't have. I started missing deadlines at work. Nothing major, but I dropped a tray one night, and the manager pulled me aside. He was nice about it, but I could tell he was worried. My tips went down because I was too tired to be that bright, chatty waitress people liked. One of my professors commented that my last paper wasn't up to my usual standard. I smiled and said I'd do better next time, but when I got home, I just sat on my bed, staring at the wall for a long time. The loneliness hit me harder than I expected. I stopped hanging out with my friends as much. I didn't want to explain why I was always broke or exhausted. The guy I'd been seeing noticed I was pulling away and eventually just stopped texting. I told myself it was for the best. I didn't have the energy for a relationship anyway. Nights were the worst. I'd lie there listening to the city sounds outside my window, calculating numbers in my head over and over, how much I owed, how much I could send home, how long I could keep this up. I kept telling myself it was temporary, just a bad stretch. I was still going to be a lawyer. I was still going to make it. But for the first time, that future started to feel a little further away, like I was watching it slowly drift out of reach. I didn't know how much more I could take. I really didn't. I kept thinking something would turn up. I applied for every emergency grant at the university, stayed up late filling out forms until my eyes burned. I even went to the financial aid office and sat there explaining my situation to this tired-looking woman behind the desk. She was sympathetic, but she said the funds were gone for the semester. I left that building feeling smaller than I ever had. I tried talking to my boss at the cafe about more hours, but he told me they were already cutting back. I asked a couple of my professors for extensions on papers, which they gave me, but that just pushed everything further down the road. I called my sister one more time, left a long voicemail, begging her to help even a little. She never called back. That one hurt more than I wanted to admit. The calls from my mom got harder to handle. She'd cry and tell me the creditors were threatening to take the house, that she didn't know how they'd survive. I'd hang up and just sit there staring at my hands, feeling this heavy pressure in my chest. I tried selling some of my textbooks, skipped more meals, started walking everywhere instead of taking the bus to save a few pesos. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. One night I was scrolling on my phone, half desperate, looking at odd job postings, anything that paid quick. That's when I saw it, this ad for high-end companionship. It was worded so carefully, almost elegant. Women wanted for dinners, events, conversation, generous compensation. It mentioned discretion and that it was for sophisticated gentlemen. At first I laughed it off. No way, not me. I closed the tab and tried to forget about it, but the idea kept coming back. I'd wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it. I told myself I was just curious, that I'd never actually do something like that. I was a law student. I had plans. I had standards. But the numbers weren't lying. The debts at home kept growing, and my own life was starting to crack under the weight. I kept imagining my mom losing the only home she had, the place where she taught piano all those years. The thought made me sick. I resisted for weeks. I tried everything else I could think of. I even considered dropping a class to work more, but that felt like giving up on my future. Every option led to the same dead end. The shame was the worst part. I felt like I was betraying everything I'd worked for, everything my younger self believed in, but at the same time there was this tiny voice saying maybe it could just be temporary. A few months. Just enough to get my family through the worst of it. I could still finish school. I could still become that lawyer. I'd stay in control. I'd be the one using the situation, not the other way around. I stared at that message for a long time one afternoon, my finger hovering over the reply button. My heart was pounding. I thought about my dad, about the secrets, about my sister leaving, about my mom's tired eyes. I thought about how hard I'd fought to get here, and then I typed back. Just a short message, asking for more details. When they replied and we set up a meeting, I told myself it was just information, but deep down, I already knew. A couple days later, after another tearful call from my mom, I finally said it out loud to the woman on the other end of the line. Yes, I'm interested. I remember the address they gave me. A nice hotel in Recoleta, not one of the super fancy ones, but still way nicer than anywhere I'd ever stayed. I took the subway and walked the last few blocks because I didn't want to spend money on a cab. My hands were shaking the whole way. I kept checking my phone, making sure I had the right floor, the right room number. When I got to the lobby, I almost turned around. The doorman nodded at me like I belonged there, and that made it worse somehow. I went up to the 8th floor. The hallway was quiet, carpeted, smelled like expensive cleaner. I stood outside, room 812, for a good minute before I knocked. A man opened the door. He looked about 50, maybe a little older, wearing a button-down shirt and slacks like he'd just come from work. He smiled, said my name like he'd practiced it. "Come in," he said. His voice was calm. That helped a little. The room was big. King bed, big windows with heavy curtains, a little sitting area with 2 chairs and a table. There was a bottle of wine already open on the table. Oh, he asked if I wanted a glass. I said yes, even though I didn't really drink much. We sat down. He asked me how I was, how my day had been. I told him it was fine. We talked about the weather, about the city. He said he traveled a lot for work and liked coming to Buenos Aires. I nodded and tried to sound interested. It felt like the longest conversation of my life. There were these long pauses where neither of us knew what to say next. I kept looking at my hands, at the wine glass, at the pattern on the carpet. He seemed nervous too, which surprised me. I thought these men would be smooth and confident. He just seemed normal, tired. He mentioned he had kids back home in another country. I didn't know what to say to that. After a while, he stood up and said we should probably get started. He didn't say it in a mean way, just matter of fact. I followed him to the bed. Everything after that felt like I was watching myself from somewhere else. I remember the sound of his belt buckle. I remember the weight of him. I remember staring at the ceiling and counting the little holes in the tiles. I remember him saying my name once, soft, like he was trying to be nice. When it was over, he got up first and went into the bathroom. I stayed there for a second, pulling the sheet over myself, even though it was too late for that. He came back with an envelope and put it on the nightstand. He didn't count it out in front of me, just left it there. He said thank you, like we'd had dinner or something. Then he told me I could take my time getting dressed. I got up and went to the bathroom. My legs felt weird. I washed my hands and looked at myself in the mirror. My makeup was still okay. My hair was a little messy. I fixed it quickly and came back out. He was already dressed again, sitting in one of the chairs checking his phone. He looked up and smiled, a small, polite smile. I picked up the envelope and put it in my bag without opening it. He walked me to the door, said maybe we could do it again sometime. I said okay, even though I didn't know if I meant it. Then I was in the hallway again, walking toward the elevator. The carpet felt different this time, softer, or maybe I was just noticing everything more. Downstairs, I didn't look at the doorman. I walked straight out onto the street. It was dark now. I started walking toward the subway. Halfway there, I stopped at a corner and opened the envelope. The money was all there, more than I usually made in 2 weeks at the cafe. I folded it and put it back in my bag. On the subway ride home, I kept my bag on my lap and stared at the floor. People got on and off. Someone was playing music too loud on their phone. I kept thinking about the way he said, thank you, about how normal it all felt, and how that made it worse. I kept thinking about the envelope in my bag and how I was already planning what I could send home with it. By the time I got off at my stop, I knew something had shifted. I couldn't name it yet, but I felt it. Like I'd stepped over a line I didn't even know was there. And now I was on the other side, and there was no going back to who I was when I walked into that hotel. The money changed things faster than I expected. After that first night, I sent most of it home and still had enough left to breathe for once. No more counting coins for bus fare. No more rice and beans every single night. Within a couple months, I paid off the worst of the hospital bills. My mom's voice on the phone sounded lighter. She could stay in the house. That alone made me keep going. I started getting regular calls, different men, different hotels. Some were locals, some foreigners in town for business. The agency took a cut, but what I kept was still more than I'd ever seen. I bought better clothes, simple black dresses that made me look like I belonged in those lobbies. I moved to a nicer apartment by myself, one with actual sunlight, and a doorman who nodded at me every morning. It felt surreal walking in with shopping bags, setting them down on real wood floors instead of cracked tile. There were moments that made me stop and think, damn, this is my life now. Like the time a client took me to this rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. We ate steak that cost more than my old monthly rent. He ordered wine by the name, and the waiter treated us like royalty. Another guy flew me to Punta del Este for a weekend, business class. I had never been on a plane where they brought you hot towels before takeoff. I sat there sipping champagne and watching the clouds, wondering how the girl who used to wait tables was suddenly here. Some nights were just weird. One client wanted me to sit with him in his suite while he worked on his laptop. He barely spoke to me, just liked having someone there. He paid double. Another one asked me to read the newspaper out loud to him because it helped him relax. No touching, just reading. I did it. I got good at rolling with whatever they wanted. I started overhearing things. Conversations in hotel bars about deals worth millions, about politicians, about who owed who favors. These men would talk like I wasn't even there sometimes, or like I was part of the furniture. One guy casually mentioned how he'd fixed a legal problem with a bribe. He laughed about it. I smiled and nodded, but inside I felt this little chill. These were the kind of people who could make problems disappear, or make people disappear. The clothes got nicer. The gifts started coming, perfume, jewelry, a watch once. I learned how to walk into a room full of wealthy people and act like I fit. I went to private events, art openings, parties on yachts. I'd stand there in a dress I couldn't have afforded a year ago, holding a glass of champagne, listening to conversations about private schools and vacation homes in Europe. It was exciting at first, addictive even, but there were other moments too. The way some men would look at me when they thought I wasn't paying attention, the casual way they'd negotiate extra things, like it was just business. The times I'd wake up in a strange hotel room and have to remind myself where I was. I started sleeping with my phone under my pillow. I told myself it was smart, just being careful. My old life faded pretty quick. University became part-time, then I took a break. My law books gathered dust on a shelf in my new place. The waitress friends I used to have stopped texting as much. I had new numbers in my phone now. Drivers, hotel concierges, the agency coordinator who always sounded cheerful when she booked me. I crossed little lines without even noticing, staying later than I wanted, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, wearing things I never would have chosen for myself, pretending I didn't mind when a client talked about his wife like she was an inconvenience. It all started feeling normal. The money kept coming, the debts kept shrinking. My mom was able to fix things around the house. I sent her enough that she didn't have to worry every month. One night I was sitting in the back of a town car the agency sent, watching the lights of Buenos Aires go by, and it hit me. I wasn't living two lives anymore. This was just my life now. The nice apartment, the nice clothes, the schedule that revolved around these men. I wasn't the girl studying law and waiting tables. That girl felt further away every week. And the scary part was, I wasn't even sure I missed her. The first year wasn't so bad, or at least that's what I told myself. The money was still coming in, and I could still point to the good it was doing. But slowly, without me really noticing, the days started blending together. I'd sleep until 2 or 3 in the afternoon, then get up, make coffee, and start getting ready for the night. My apartment stayed dark during the day because I kept the curtains closed. Sunlight felt too bright. Clients changed. Some were still polite, the ones who wanted company more than anything. There was this older businessman from Spain who just wanted someone to listen to him talk about his divorce. He tipped well and never touched me much. I'd sit there nodding, saying the right things, while inside I was counting the hours until I could leave. Other ones were different. They wanted me to pretend I was someone else. Different names, different backstories. I got good at it. Lena from the coast, Valeria who studied art, whatever they wanted to hear. One guy in his 40s liked taking me to these exclusive parties. He'd introduce me as his assistant or a friend from university. I'd stand there smiling while people talked about investments and private jets. I learned to read the room fast, who was important, who to avoid, when to laugh at a joke. But after a while, even those fancy places stopped feeling special. The champagne tasted the same. The views from the balconies all looked alike. I'd catch myself zoning out, wondering what I was doing there. I started missing things. My mom's birthday one year. I sent flowers and called the next day, but I could hear the disappointment in her voice. I told her I had exams. Another lie on top of all the others, my old university friends stopped reaching out. I'd see their photos on social media, graduations, trips, normal life stuff, and I'd scroll past quickly. What was I supposed to say? That I couldn't come because I had a booking at the Alvear? The agency started sending me to more complicated jobs, a client who wanted me to stay the whole weekend, another who got angry if I checked my phone. I learned to keep it on silent and delete everything before I left. I had a whole system: separate SIM card, fake stories memorized, cash always ready in case something went wrong. I started checking exits in hotel rooms without thinking about it. Just a quick glance, making sure I knew the way out. There were nights that stuck with me. One man, polite on the surface, kept pushing little boundaries. He wanted me to call him Sir the whole time. He'd correct me if I forgot. It wasn't violent, but it made my skin crawl. I did it anyway. Another time I went to an apartment in Puerto Madero, and there were 2 guys instead of 1. They said the agency had cleared it. I smiled and acted like it was fine, but my stomach was in knots the whole evening. I left with more money than usual and didn't sleep for 2 days. I got better at pretending, laughing at the right moments, looking interested when they talked about their boats or their mistresses. I stopped feeling shocked by the things I heard. Men casually mentioning affairs, shady business deals, the way they talked about other women like they were disposable. I'd nod along and pour another drink. The numbness crept in so quietly. One day, I realized I hadn't cried in months. I couldn't even remember the last time I felt really happy or really sad. Everything was just flat. My body started showing the wear. I'd wake up with bruises I didn't remember getting. My back hurt from uncomfortable beds and high heels. I spent more and more on nice creams and massages just to look put together. The mirror became this thing I avoided some mornings. I'd put on makeup like armor, fixing my face until I looked like the version of me they paid for. Friendships disappeared completely. I tried meeting an old classmate once for coffee. She asked what I was doing now, and I made up something about consulting work. The conversation felt forced. I left early, saying I had another meeting. After that, I stopped trying. It was easier to stay in my nice apartment, order delivery, and watch shows until it was time to get ready again. The worst part was how normal it all started to feel, forgetting what day it was, booking my own calendar around the agency's schedule, feeling relieved when a client canceled because it meant I could just stay home and do nothing. I had a whole drawer full of gifts from different men: watches, necklaces, scarves. I never wore most of them. They just sat there like reminders. I crossed so many lines I used to have. Staying when I wanted to leave, laughing off comments that would have made the old me walk out, telling bigger and bigger lies to my mom. I'm doing well in my studies, Mom. Everything's fine. I said it so many times it almost sounded true, even to me. One night I was in a luxury suite looking out at the city lights, a client sleeping behind me, and I caught my reflection in the dark window. I looked expensive, polished, empty. I didn't feel anything. No pride, no disgust, no fear. Just tired. I poured myself a drink from the minibar, sat down, and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd had a completely normal day. No bookings, no pretending, just me. And the scary thing was, I didn't even want one. This had become my life, the only one I knew how to live anymore. I remember the building. One of those new glass towers in Puerto Madero, the kind with a doorman who doesn't even look at you once you say the right name. I took the elevator to the 28th floor. The hallway was quiet, just soft lighting and thick carpet. When I knocked on the door, a man in his 50s opened it. He was wearing a nice shirt, smiling. He said my name like we'd met before. There were 2 other men inside, same age range, sitting on the big couches with a bottle of wine already open on the table. At first, it felt like any other job. They offered me a glass. We talked about the city, about travel. One of them asked where I was from. I gave them the story I always gave. They laughed at the right moments. Everything seemed normal. I kept thinking this would be an easy night. 3 guys who just wanted company and conversation. Then the main one, the one who'd opened the door, set his glass down and looked at me. He said they'd paid for the full package. No restrictions. He said it like he was confirming a business detail. I tried to smile and say something about what the agency had told me. He just kept looking at me. The other 2 didn't say anything. One of them stood up and walked toward the bedroom door. I remember the exact moment the air in the room changed. It got heavier. They weren't smiling anymore in the same way. I said I needed to check something on my phone just to buy a second. One of them took the phone out of my hand and set it on the table. He said, "You're a professional. You know how this works." They led me into the bedroom. I kept saying I wasn't comfortable with this, that this wasn't what I'd agreed to. They acted like they couldn't hear me. One of them pulled out these soft ropes from a drawer, like they'd done this before. I started backing up. That's when the main guy grabbed my arm. Not hard at first, just firm. Everything after that happened fast, but also in slow motion. They got me on the bed. I was fighting, but there were 3 of them, and they knew what they were doing. One of them wrapped something around my wrists and tied them to the headboard. I remember the sound of the fabric tightening. I remember one of them telling me to relax, that it would be easier that way. Then one of them put his hands around my neck. Not all the way at first. Just enough pressure that I couldn't speak properly. I could still breathe, but it felt like I was breathing through a straw. The third one had his phone out, filming. I remember screaming. It didn't sound like my voice. They laughed. The one filming said, "You're a professional, remember?" The pressure on my neck got worse. My vision started going dark at the edges. I kept trying to kick, to twist, but it didn't do anything. I thought I was going to die in that room. I really thought that was it. The last thing I remember clearly is the sound of them laughing and the phone recording. I must have blacked out for a while. When I came to, the ropes were off. My wrists hurt. My throat hurt. The room was quiet. One of them was standing by the door with an envelope. He threw it on the bed and said, if I talked about this, the video would go online. Then they told me to get dressed and get out. I don't remember putting my clothes on. I just remember walking down that long hallway to the elevator, trying not to look at the mirrors. My legs were shaking so bad I could barely stand. In the elevator, I saw my reflection. My neck had red marks. My eyes looked empty. Downstairs, the doorman didn't even glance at me. I walked out into the street. It was early morning. People were going to work. Cars were honking. The city was just waking up like nothing had happened. I had the envelope in my bag. I didn't open it. I walked until I found a cab. I told the driver to take me home. I kept checking the rearview mirror the whole ride, like someone might be following me. When I got to my apartment, I locked the door and sat on the floor with my back against it. I didn't cry. I just sat there staring at nothing. The phone in my bag felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I kept thinking about that video, about how easy it would be for them to destroy whatever was left of my life. I knew right then I couldn't do this anymore. Not one more night. Not for any amount of money. Something inside me had finally broken, and there was no putting it back together. Getting out wasn't one big moment. It was 100 small ones that almost broke me. After that night in the penthouse, I tried to quit 3 different times. The first time I just stopped answering the agency's calls. They kept texting saying I had commitments, that clients were asking for me. I changed my number. 2 weeks later, a different number called. I blocked it. The fear never left. I kept expecting someone to show up at my door. Tomas was the one who helped me when I couldn't help myself. He was a regular client, an older architect. He saw the bruises on my neck the next week and didn't push for anything. He just sat there quietly and asked if I was okay. I lied at first, then I told him pieces of the truth. He paid for my first therapy sessions, never asked for anything in return. I still don't know why he did it. I moved to a different neighborhood. Then, when the messages kept coming, I left Buenos Aires for a few months and stayed with a distant cousin in Cordoba. I lost most of my things in that move. My nice clothes, the gifts, all of it felt poisoned anyway. Coming back was harder. I had no savings left after a while. The money from that life disappeared fast on rent, and trying to stay hidden, I took a job at a coffee shop again, the kind where I was on my feet all day. My hands shook pouring coffee. I had panic attacks in the storage room. Nights were the worst. I'd wake up gasping, feeling hands around my neck. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, replaying that hotel room, wondering if the video was out there somewhere. I tried going back to law school part-time. I couldn't focus. The guilt ate at me. I felt like I'd thrown away everything I worked for. My mom never knew the full story. I just told her I'd been sick and needed time. She believed me because she wanted to. I still carry that shame. Therapy was slow. I sat in a small office week after week, barely speaking at first. Then the words started coming out, ugly and messy. I joined a survivors group. Listening to other women talk made me feel less alone, but it also made the nightmares worse for a while. I kept thinking about all the lines I'd crossed, all the things I'd told myself were temporary. I still can't fully forgive myself for believing I was in control. Little by little, things started shifting. I got a job as a legal assistant at a small firm that works with victims of trafficking and domestic violence. It's not glamorous, the pay is modest, but when I help a woman file papers or explain her options, I feel like I'm doing something that matters. On weekends, I teach piano to girls from poor neighborhoods. I sit with them in community centers, watching their fingers move across the keys the way mine used to. Some of them have that same determined look I had at their age. I try to give them something solid to hold on to. I still have bad days, the fear of being recognized, the way certain colognes or hotel lobbies make my stomach drop. I don't trust easily. Relationships are hard. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, but I'm learning. Slowly. I talk about the nightmares in group. I don't drink to numb them anymore. I walk in the mornings now in San Telmo near where I live. The same streets feel different when you're not running from anything. I'm 34 now. I go by Lena Vale. Valeria feels like someone I used to know. My dad died while I was still in the middle of everything. I never got to tell him what I thought about what he did. That regret still sits there. Some things don't heal clean, but I'm here. I made it out. If you're listening to this and you're in it right now or thinking about getting out, I'm not going to tell you it's easy. It's not. It might be the hardest thing you ever do, but you're worth fighting for, even on the days when you don't believe it. I walked into hell wearing my own pride as armor and crawled out with nothing but scars and the will to make sure no other girl has to learn the same lesson the hard way.